So welcome to episode 5 of the UFO Show. This week we have a special guest, Gord Randall, and welcome to the show this week, Gord.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Happy to be here.
Gord, what's going on? Blue Jays, how are they doing this year?
Well, they're an interesting. They're kind of a studs and duds lineup. I mean, they've got some superstars and some guys who are playing at just an MVP level right now. They've hit a couple free agent home runs in Robbie Ray and Marcus Semien. They can hit the cover off of any baseball they see. But they've had, it feels like they've had this kind of rotating issues throughout the year where they, for a while there, they didn't have the starting pitching out of the gate, and then their bullpen kind of fell apart. And then, they addressed the bullpen with a couple of veteran arms, and the bats went cold in the last week before the break. But all that being said, they're still 2 games over 500, I think, going at the All-Star break here and right in the thick of things in the AL. But the other issue, and this seems to be a perennial issue for them, is that the AL East is stacked as always. And it's not that the Yankees and the Red Sox are going to contend for a World Series every single year these days, but one of them always is. And then I don't know what voodoo curse or deal with the devil the Tampa Bay Rays have made, but they always seem to be an elite team. And yet I defy the casual baseball fan to name 2 people in their lineup. And yet this is a team that's going to win 100 games again this year. So it's a high hill that they need to climb. But I think there's a lot of optimism surrounding the team because the front office staff has indicated that they're going to move aggressively to add what they think they need to add this year. And most of the core of this team, the guys that are really carrying it, with the exception of Semien and Ray, basically, are locked up long term, I should say. Excuse me. So I think there's a lot of optimism around where they are right now, but they're going to have a strong second half. They're not going to be content just to rest on their laurels, or they're going to end up on the outside looking in.
So in case everybody watching hasn't noticed yet, this week we are going to be talking some baseball here on the UFO Show. Once again, all of the odds that we're going to be giving you today are from bet99.com. They're partnered with the Area Sports Network, Area 51 Sports Network. So if you go to the Area 51 Sports Network website, you can get $600 off of initial deposit. And Gord, I haven't watched the Tampa Bay game. I never watched the Rays. But I do know one player on there, former Seattle Mariners Mike Zunino. He was in the All-Star game, correct? Even though a lot of people think he didn't deserve to be there.
Well, he's an interesting case because he, in terms of your traditional batter stats, one of them he's really good at, and the other one he's really bad at. In that his batting average is under 200, and I think his career batting average is now actually under 200. But the guy hits a lot of dingers, so he racks up RBIs and he racks up home runs, and so that carried him into the game. And there's a very positive perception around his defensive game too. So I think that helped him out as well. But yeah, he was in the All-Star game. Joey Wendle was in the All-Star game for the Tampa Bay Rays, and that's another name that I'm sure there were a lot of people watching that All-Star game on Tuesday night going, who's this guy? But yeah, that's just what Tampa Bay does. And when you face the Rays, it's so demoralizing because if you don't have the lead after the 5th inning, it's over. Like, they've just got this endless line of dudes that come in throwing absolute smoke out of the bullpen. You're going to see a different 100-mile-an-hour fastball every single inning. And one of the really interesting graphics around the Tampa Bay pen that I saw a few weeks back is somebody did an overlay of all the release points from the various pitchers in the Tampa Bay staff, and it's just about every hour on the clock. Like, you see every possible arm slot coming out of that pen, so everything's a different look too. And so I actually avoid watching Blue Jays Rays games because that team just has this way of sucking the absolute life out of you and making even the games that you grind out a win, like, everything feels like an absolute grind when you're playing the Tampa Bay Rays.
They sound a lot like the New York Islanders.
Yeah, I would say that's a really good comparison. Definitely, like, a very similar style to the Islanders of baseball. Like, everything is hard against the Tampa Bay Rays. And there's also this weird voodoo at Tropicana Field where, like, teams just seem to play really bad there. Like the Jays average like 2.5 errors a game at Tropicana Field this year. Like, it's just terrible. And you're like, what is wrong with this team? But it's been going on for years. Like, even when the Rays were terrible before they figured out this magic formula to be a playoff team every year, even when they were terrible, the Jays sucked when they went down to Tampa. So now that they're good, it makes it even harder.
Exactly. Before we discuss their game tomorrow versus the Braves, I was doing some trade deadline research, and it's funny, Gord, that you mentioned, they have all these relievers who throw from all different perspectives, because I think they're actually going to add another reliever or two. What are your thoughts on that? They seem to have this weird thing where their pitcher goes 4 and then they run out their bullpen, like you said, for the rest of the game.
Yeah, they need lots of arms with the way that they handle their pitching staff. And one of the other things that I find actually quite interesting about Tampa is the way that they handle their rotation too. Like, they have some of their guys will make your orthodox starts where they'll let them go, 5 innings, 2 to 3 times through the order. And then their next start, they'll have them as an opener and they'll bring in a bulk guy after it. Or they'll put an opener in front of some of their starters. I think I saw that Colin McHugh, they're going to make a spot start with him at some point this week, and he's been pitching primarily out of the pen this year. So what they need for a strategy like that, and it's effective because it keeps everybody guessing. But what you need for a strategy like that is you need lots of major league caliber arms available. And so, adding to the bullpen, it's always safe as a contender to add to the bullpen, right? It's never going to be super exorbitant, although prices seem to continue to climb higher and higher, and you can always use bullpen help. And so if you are looking at a contender and going, I don't really see the holes here, you can go, but they'll add to the bullpen because you can always add to the bullpen.
That's right. Gord, great to have you on. We brought you on to talk some baseball and some betting. Obviously, Red Sox Yankees tonight, for those who don't know, got postponed due to COVID. So since we're talking Rays, I guess we'll jump in here. The Rays, the first game here. So Rays are plus 114 on the money line. Braves are minus 134. It's Charlie Morton for the Braves facing his old team. And then we have Michael Wacha going for Tampa. Who do you like in this game, Gord?
So I like the Rays, and my reasoning for that, my main reason for that is that the Braves, this is going to be, I believe, their second game. I think they squeezed one more in before the All-Star break after losing Ronald Acuna Jr. To a torn ACL for the rest of the season. But they're still reeling from that. And if you look at this Braves roster and the way their season has gone, I mean, as much as I've implied that the Tampa Bay Rays always seem to be fortunate and catch breaks, the Braves have been the absolute opposite this year. They have had, Freddie Freeman was just at the All-Star game, but if you look at his stats from the first half, he is very much underperforming his career norms. Keep in mind, this guy was the National League MVP last year, and he has been a below average. I think he's just creeped up to average 100 weighted runs created plus as an average offensive performer just before the All-Star break. So that's well below his career norms. Acuna is now done for the year. Marcell Ozuna turned into a piece of garbage and also got hurt and also was absolutely horrifically bad before he did get hurt. So you're probably not seeing Marcell Ozuna at all this year. Mike Soroka, the young hurler from Calgary, who prior to the middle of last season was, even though he was only 22, was seen as the ace of this staff. He tears his ACL last year, works his way back, looks like he's going to be ready to go by about June 1st, and pops it again, literally just casually walking into their facility one day. And so now his season, probably next season, and maybe even his career are over, because research into re-ruptures of an Achilles tendon is not favorable in terms of outcomes. It's very, very difficult to go back to health that. So that was kind of a roundabout way of saying, like, the Braves are absolutely reeling right now. They're going through some stuff, and they're also underperforming their talent level in a lot of cases too. So they're going to be up against it here. I do like the pitching matchup. I think that favors the Braves in that Wacha is kind of a back end type of starter at this point in his career. But that being said, I just think there's too much going on for Atlanta right now. I think your smart money would be on the Rays there.
I would agree. Adam, do you agree with us? Or are you taking the Braves here?
Sure. Like many people know, I don't watch a lot of baseball. I know who Charlie Morton is because I owned the MLB video game last season, and he was like a high end player. But I would be concerned about Acuna just because he is kind of like the lifeblood of that team. I know Freddie Freeman is still there, but Acuna seems to be like the guy, and it was really demoralizing for the Braves to lose him. But I do think that, this break was good. It came at the perfect time for them. They could kind of get reset, and I think that they're going to have a little bit of success. So yeah, I think taking the Braves in this game is not a bad choice.
I agree. Excuse me. Next game here, we have LA Angels versus Seattle Mariners. Andrew Heaney for the Angels versus Chris Flexen for the Mariners. The Mariners are plus 143, Angels minus 170. What are your thoughts on this one, Gord?
Is that game in Seattle?
I believe it is in Seattle, yes.
So I really like the Mariners, and my reasoning for that is that Chris Flexen, and this is a guy that's not a name that a lot of average household fans will know. He just came over from the Korean League this year. This is his first year back in the major leagues since being over in Korea for a couple years, and he has been very solid for the Mariners across the board. But in particular, he's been lights out at home. He has an ERA under 3. Pitching out of, I keep wanting to call it Safeco Field still, but T-Mobile Field, I think it is now. Yeah. T-Mobile Park. Anyway, whatever. The pink looks horrific, by the way. But he has been outstanding pitching out of Seattle. And so that's a matchup I really like. And the Angels, everybody's enamored with Shohei Ohtani, but, I keep seeing this tweet that gets recycled from a user on Twitter. I think it's at Matt Tomic. And he says, every Angels headline I see is like, Shohei Ohtani went 4 for 4 and hit a 475-foot bomb as the Angels lose 7-3. And that's basically what the Angels season has been like. A couple of names to keep an eye on for the Angels, though, that were really heating up before the break were David Fletcher, their second baseman, guy not known for a lot of power. In fact, he hit his first home run of the year about a week and a half ago, but he then followed that up with 2 more bombs and had a 3 home run week and batted about 450 in the last week before the break. So he was heating up, and the other guy who is heating up and is finally back healthy for them, who's one of the most underrated players in the major leagues right now, actually, is their catcher, Max Stassi. And he can provide some serious pop from behind the plate as well. So despite the fact that Mike Trout is still injured at this point in time for the Angels, they have some thump in that lineup. And I should also mention Jared Walsh, the first baseman, who for some reason played outfield in the All-Star game, who can also bang. So there's some pop in that lineup, but Flexen's been really good in Seattle. And the Mariners are a fun team. Like, if you are a baseball fan who's just a fan of the game and you want to watch a good, like, neutral, no rooting interest game, watching Shohei Ohtani and this Mariners team, pretty good time if you're just a neutral observer.
That's right. And I feel bad now, Gord. You gave us a nice breakdown. The game is actually in Anaheim. So my bad.
That's okay. Yeah. So that shifts things a little bit. Anaheim is these days plays as more of a pitcher's park than Seattle does. Flexen hasn't been quite as strong on the road, and I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the Mariners over the last couple seasons have not fared particularly well in Anaheim either. So that may tip the scales a little bit for me. It would have been a slam dunk Seattle pick if that game was being played in Seattle, in my opinion. I think it moves the needle back a little closer to the middle. I think the big variable here is you never know what you're going to get out of Andrew Heaney. We've seen seasons from him where he's looked like a 1-2 top end starter, has put together a couple seasons with ERAs just over 3. And then this season he's been terrible again. I think he's up in close to 5.5. And you just never know what you're going to get out of him. So I would say this one's a toss up. I know you guys bring me on to actually have an opinion one way or the other. So I think I'll still stick with Seattle, but I'm a lot more hesitant to put money on that than I would have been had this been in Seattle.
Yeah, no, I agree, Gord. I actually have the Mariners +1 run that pays out at +103. So I'm kind of riding the fence with you there as well.
Well, also, to be fair, Gord, the Mariners have just done bad everywhere that they played the last couple seasons.
That is true. That is true. I think the last 40 seasons or so.
Yeah, exactly.
The Mariners are actually a very interesting case because, they had the big public, what was it, their president basically like shitting on all the players before the season. You had Kyle Seager, who's kind of like the face of the franchise now. Just basically, was he going to come back? Is he not? And they've kind of used that, it looks like, as motivation, because now they're 3.5 games back. They have a better record right now than the Blue Jays do, and it seems like they're just using that momentum. Like, this might be the year for the first time in 20 years that they make the playoffs. Like all the momentum seems to be coming, but this is what happens every year. They do well, and then come August, it just falls out from underneath them.
Yeah, they've been hanging April banners for a number of seasons now.
Yeah.
The other thing I should mention too that we should include as part of this conversation is the news broke this afternoon that the Mariners are going to be calling their top prospect Jarred Kelenic back up for this game, and hopefully for good at this point. Now Kelenic, for those who don't know, absolutely just ripping up AAA, consensus top 10 prospect in Major League Baseball. He got brought up back in May, and he struggled mightily at the Major League level. I think he went through like an 0 for 29 slump or something like that at one point. Yeah. Ultimately got sent back down to get some things right. This guy is extremely talented. In my opinion, it's one of those guys where it's just a matter of when he's going to figure it out at the Major League level as opposed to if. So that could really move the needle for the Mariners in the second half. If Kelenic is ready this time, they could really make a run. But again, they're in tough too. Like I think that the tilt between the American League and the National League this year leans very heavily towards the American League. Now the Central is junk, as it almost always seems to be, with the Twins falling off the map and the Indians being their one strength being pitching, just being ravaged by injuries. The Central's terrible. It's basically the White Sox and a bunch of chumps. But the AL West is strong too. The Astros are back to being the Astros. It looks like all the cheating stuff maybe didn't actually do that much for them, because they're back to looking like one of the best teams in the league. And the Oakland Athletics, again, another team that people seem to overlook, and they just keep producing. They keep producing. And Matt Chapman, Matt Olson have been fantastic this year. So for the Mariners, they've got a tough hill to climb too. Like I saw a projection today that estimated that it's going to take 90 wins to get into one of the wild card spots in the AL. And that's a tough hill to climb. Like both the Mariners and the Blue Jays, who have roughly the same record right now, they're going to have to play about 650 winning percentage ball for the rest of the year in order to get that 90 win mark. So either of those teams, they're going to have a strong second half to get in.
Before we move on to the Blue Jays, you're right, Gord. With this trade deadline, it's going to be interesting, right? Because I think Athletics have a huge hole at middle infielder. I think Javi Baez from the Cubs, probably a good fit there. If there's a weakness on the Astros, it's probably their bullpen. I mean, there's going to be a lot of bullpen arms. I think Craig Kimbrell, would be interesting. So be interested in with the Mariners if they decide to just kind of let the season play out, or if if Kelenic has a strong week here, if they do push and try to get somebody like an Andrew Chafin or Ryan Tepera to help out their bullpen.
You're just trying to pawn off all your Cubbies on everybody, hey?
I am. That's right. Anybody's got good prospects, you send them over this way.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, the Mariners bullpen is an interesting case study because they have a bunch of guys that don't really have a lot of cachet and a lot of track record who are all pitching extremely well right now. They've got a couple guys that even were brought in as like non-roster invitees. Drew Steckenrider is one of them. And the other guy's been serving as their closer recently, and his name's escaping me at the moment. But these guys were both brought in as non-roster invitees in training camp, and they're both throwing to like a sub-3 ERA out of the pen and just blowing guys away. And so the bullpen for the Mariners on the whole has been really strong this year. But how much weight do you put on guys that don't necessarily have a lengthy track record of consistent success? If it looks like the Mariners are going to continue to be a serious playoff contender, I agree that they should be looking to add some established major league arm, at least one, to that pen. And I also think that their starting rotation, there's a hole in that starting rotation. Like Marco Gonzalez has had a really rough year. And that's a guy who, again, was kind of the de facto ace of that staff as recently as a year ago. And he has really been bad this year. He's almost at a 6 ERA. And another guy that struggled in that rotation has been Justice Sheffield, who still quite hasn't put it all together at the major league level. So Kikuchi and Flexen have been really strong. And then there's question marks in that rotation. So that might be another place where they look to add potentially if they do see themselves as playoff contenders that need that little bump.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Well, it leads nicely into our next game here, the Blue Jays and the Texas Rangers. Rangers do have Kyle Gibson, who I could see potentially being a fit for the Mariners, kind of that, 1A, 1B sort of, not really a true ace, but a good number 2 on a playoff team, like you mentioned there, Gord. So this Blue Jays Rangers game, we have Robbie Ray for the Jays versus Jordan Lyles for the Rangers. Blue Jays are massive favorites here. It's minus 264 in the money line, and Rangers at plus 215. I think I know where you're going to go, but why don't you give us your pick anyway, Gord?
Yeah, I mean, it's, despite the odds being heavily stacked in the Blue Jays' favor here, I'm still going with them. And one of the main reasons for that has been the form of Robbie Ray recently. There's a reason that they've essentially skipped, because of the All-Star break, they've essentially been able to skip 2 spots in the rotation and move Robbie Ray up to his normal rest despite the All-Star break. So he pitched, I believe, their last game or their second last game before the All-Star break. And he's now going to pitch the first game out of the All-Star break too. And that's a testament to how well he's throwing right now. And he's an interesting guy to watch because he's essentially a 2-pitch pitcher. And he's got one of the best sliders in the league. It's a really good slider, but he's only coming at you. Don't get me wrong. This isn't anything to sneeze at, but he's only coming at you at 95, 96. As a 2-pitch pitcher, you would think that may not be quite enough to get it done, but it is. And he makes some guys look silly on his fastball. And I think it's because that slider is it's one of the best pitches in the major leagues. And the biggest thing for Robbie Ray in his career has always been walks. Last year, his walk rate ballooned to over 5 walks per 9 innings. And so his ERA ballooned as well. And this year, that number is down close to 2. And it's been even lower than that in his last 5 starts. So this guy is in fine form. And you look at the Texas lineup, and a lot of guys that they were hoping would take a step. Nobody thought that Texas would be a real contender this year anyway. Let's get that off the table. But some guys that they were hoping would take steps in the right direction and start carrying them this year. Guys like Willie Calhoun, guys like Nick Solak. It just hasn't happened for them. And so I really like the matchup. Now Jordan Lyles has been pitching pretty well for them this year, but he's also another guy that's been a journeyman, right? A guy that's bounced around and doesn't really move the needle much. So I like the Jays in this game. And frankly, unless Joey Gallo runs into one, I wouldn't be surprised if the Rangers are held to 2 runs or less in this one.
Yeah, see, I kind of feel like I do like the Blue Jays to win. I kind of feel the opposite way, though. I'm looking at these odds, and I still have a problem trusting the Blue Jays bullpen. So Rangers plus 1.5 runs pays out at plus 109. I mean, anytime you can basically get 2 runs for free and still have pretty good odds, I think I'd probably take Rangers plus 1.5. leaves room for the Jays to win, but also leaves room for the impending Blue Jays bullpen explosion, which seems to happen, 5 times a week. So I don't know. What about you, Adam? What do you think? What are you leaning here?
Well, for me, yeah, probably Blue Jays. I don't really Texas. So in baseball, when you have that big of a line, it usually means that I don't know. There's some sort of injury going on, or some sort of injury concerns, or the pitcher is brand new. So there has to be something within this game that maybe we're missing. That's why the line is so long. I know the Texas Rangers aren't good to start with, but for a baseball line to be that big at one game usually means that there might be some sort of injury, or there might be something going on with the Texas Rangers that maybe we're not totally aware of. Because but take the Blue Jays on that line, even though you're not going to make a ton of money off of it.
Yeah, I think it's also the effect of the All-Star game, right? The Blue Jays had basically their entire infield in the All-Star game. Bichette played, Semien started, Guerrero won MVP. So, you look at the Rangers roster, I can name 3 players maybe, and Joey Gallo is really their only star.
Well, and there's trade rumors following Joey Gallo around right now. So he's got his name on the block. The other guy that was in the All-Star game for the Jays is Teoscar Hernandez. And some of the guys that weren't there for the Jays are worth mentioning too. George Springer lost most of his first half due to injury, but he looks like he's starting to feel it again. And you look at that Jays lineup, and their 7-8 hitters are 2 outfielders with above average production for outfielders in Lourdes Gurriel and Randall Grichuk. So it's a deep lineup, but you're right. I think there's some recency bias at play too, in that the Jays have been pretty high profile lately, and Vladdy Guerrero put on another show at the All-Star game, as he seems to do pretty much every time he laces up the cleats. And so I do think that there's some optimism, some better optimism, if you will, behind the Jays, just because of that profile, like you were saying.
So before we wrap up here, with the show, I'm going to throw out 2 odds for you, 2 future odds that maybe people can put some money on. 2 of the closest divisions based off of Bet99.com's betting. So the first one is the AL West. You have the Houston Astros at minus 556, the Oakland Athletics at plus 360, and then the Mariners at plus 2,600. Do you take the Astros, or do you think there's a chance the Athletics pass them?
There's definitely a chance the Athletics pass them. But as Andy was alluding to earlier, the Athletics have, while they've been largely successful this year, they do have a couple of pretty glaring holes. And the biggest one is at shortstop, where Elvis Andrus has continued to just fade into irrelevancy. And the irony, I should point out, they traded Chris Davis for him straight up, Chris with the K, that is. And they still managed to win that trade because Chris Davis has been DFA'd already. So neither team came out on top on that one. But Andrus has been well below average with the bat again this year. And is a pretty mediocre fielder at the shortstop position as well. So that's a pretty glaring hole for them. And then their bullpen is kind of hanging on right now, but they lost Liam Hendricks in the offseason, their closer, who just made another All-Star game with the White Sox. And so the back end of that bullpen is a little thinner than we're used to seeing for the A's as well. So they're a team that will need to add pieces to catch up to the Astros. I know we don't like betting favorites if we can avoid it, but I would still probably put money on the Astros because there's just a lot fewer question marks in that lineup. And basically the biggest one for the Astros is at catcher, where Martin Maldonado, who was proud to tell us that he wasn't wearing a buzzer while batting $160, has been doing very little offensively for them, and is a pretty mediocre defender as a catcher as well. So they could afford to upgrade that position, but a lot of teams have basically no offense going from catcher, and it's fine. And so I think they've got a lot of really interesting young arms in that rotation. Framber Valdez, Christian Javier, Jose Urquidy. They lost Verlander this season, but they haven't really missed a beat. Lance McCullers is back and pitching well. And so that Astros team, I don't think that they're a World Series contender the way that they were in seasons past, but I do think that they're comfortably the stronger looking team in that division, in my opinion.
And the last future that we'll throw out before we end off the show today, the NL West, which is probably the tightest division out there, especially from a betting perspective. You got the Dodgers at minus 257, the Giants at plus 370, and then the Padres at plus 420. So who takes that division?
The big wild card here is the San Francisco Giants. I gotta be honest, guys. I still can't figure this team out. I have no idea how they're doing it. Kevin Gausman all of a sudden is a Cy Young contender, and I know that Baltimore has destroyed a lot of pitching careers, but never would have seen the things that he's done since moving out to the West Coast coming. He wasn't great in Atlanta his 1 year there either, and yet he comes out to San Fran last season. Pitches really well for them last season, signs his qualifying offer this year, and has put in, he's a legitimate NL Cy Young contender carrying that rotation, which has been strong top to bottom. And then the lineup, which is essentially the same lineup that was basically a last place team the last couple seasons, is getting it done. And it's a bizarre bunch. And it feels like we used to talk about the even year magic with the Giants. Like, it feels like one of those, except it's 2021, so it doesn't quite fit the pattern. But it kind of feels like that. They won 3 World Series in the 2010s, and yet at no point were they considered the best team in baseball in that decade. And yet they won 3 World Series. So yeah, like they're a real wild card that I can't quite figure out. The Padres are they have a few guys that just are underperforming a little bit right now. If I were taking it straight up, I would pick the Dodgers again. But there's something about the Giants. It would be one of the biggest underdog stories in baseball if the Giants managed to win that division. But I would probably, as I'm not a smart bettor necessarily, but I would probably bet on the Giants just because I think that would be really cool to see. And since I can't make sense of them, I might as well make some money out of it if they keep stumbling me and flummoxing me.
I agree. I'd take the Giants. Thing with the Padres, they have Blake Snell and Yu Darvish on the IL right now. And Gord, just before we go here, it's Colorado Rockies are plus 149,900. Just wanted to let you know. For those who don't know, Gord's a Rockies fan, so
I am a Blue Jays fan first and a Rockies fan second. I'll be honest, I'm actually kind of an NL West fan. Like I've been to 4 of those 5 ballparks. I haven't been down to Phoenix yet. But I have a weird soft spot for all the teams in that division, and I think it's probably because they're all from like really nice cities that I like going and visiting. So, but yeah, I'm a Rockies fan second, and I had a tough time watching that All-Star game with the inevitable, Nolan Arenado return and stuff like that, and it's
and Trevor Story potentially playing his last game in Colorado.
Yeah, he will be. It's a question of when he'll be traded as opposed to if at this point in time. And he said from the outset this season that he wasn't interested in discussing an extension this season. And frankly, I don't blame him. And this was the other part when Arenado got traded. Like on the surface, that's a terrible trade anyway. Especially given the money that they gave the Cardinals to take him. But you factor in the Trevor Story aspect of things. Your second best player, you just traded your best player, and your second best player is a pending free agent who was best friends with the guy. So you basically just traded both those guys for Austin Gomber and a bag of magic beans. And so yeah, they're the Canucks of baseball in terms of the level of mismanagement, in my opinion. And it's of course, it's me who happens to be like one of the only crossovers between the two, who cares about both. So,
so thank you very much for joining us. Why don't you quickly shout out where people can find you on social media?
Sure. Yeah, I'm most active on Twitter. You can find me at GA Randall, so GARANDALL. And if you are a football fan, in particular a college football fan, you can see me in the fall. We'll start back up for football season on TSN on Crown Gridiron Nation. We spend our shows tracking Canadian athletes who are playing college football, both in Canada and in particular in the States, and D1 down the States. And we keep you updated as to what they're doing down there. Ties in nicely with some of the NCAA games that TSN shows on that network. So we were on Wednesdays last year, but keep your eye on your local listings for Crown Gridiron Nation starting in late August, early September.
Well, thank you very much, Gord, for joining us. Once again, thank you to the sponsor, bet99.com, for sponsoring the segment. And to head over to the Area51sportsnetwork.com website, over to the betting page, where if you put down $600, you get an additional $600 to play with. So it's a pretty great deal. Make sure to pay attention in the next couple of weeks. We're going to have lots of baseball talk. And then, in a couple, I guess in a month or so, NFL is back. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, especially in the betting world, UFC, a lot of stuff in the summer, even though there's no hockey and basketball. There's still some stuff to bet on. Okay.